From across time and space and throughout the multiverse, listen as multiple generations of geeks come together to discuss the iconic characters, events, and franchises that make up the very fabric of pop culture as we know it. Let Your Geek Side Show presents Then and Now. Hey guys, this is Kitty.
And Melanie.
And we're coming to you from the Sideshow Studios in Southern California. This week, we're unraveling the complex web around one of the most important women in Spider-Man's life. An all-around nice girl, Gwen Stacy is mainly known for two things in Marvel Comics: her infamous death and her recent new lease on life as Spider-Gwen. Who is Gwen Stacy? Why is she important? And how has her radioactive reboot reinvigorated the character in recent years? Join us in the Spider-Verse as we discuss Gwen Stacy Then and Now. Hi, Mel. Thank you for joining me this week.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay.
So, I asked if you wanted to be part of this podcast because you do have a Gwen Stacy Spider-Gwen statue on your desk.
I do, because I saw Spider-Verse, and she's a badass. Like, I like her haircut a lot. And she's very feminine, like she's a dancer. But she also, like, doesn't take down. And, you know, I had the opportunity to obtain the statue, and I took it.
Excellent. Well, she's a very interesting character because you are more familiar with the Spider-Gwen side of her. But she has had an infamous comic book history. One of my favorite phrases in all of comics is "no one stays dead in comics except for Uncle Ben, Bucky Barnes, and Jason Todd." For a while, though, it seemed like Gwen Stacy would also apply to this. Like, no one stays dead except for Gwen Stacy. But even Bucky Barnes and Jason Todd got revisited or reawakened. So technically, no one stays dead in comics except Uncle Ben. But it's very important to note that a lot of characters surrounding Spider-Man do have these near-death experiences as part of his learning of responsibility. And Gwen Stacy is perhaps one of the most famous. Fans may know her version of her death from either the comics or the Amazing Spider-Man film. Was actually, they adapted that with Emma Stone. But for a long time, the most famous thing that ever happened to Gwen Stacy, or that she did, was that she died being saved by Spider-Man, which I think is an interesting take on the character. Her death did have a lot of impact, and actually I didn't realize it was so soon, but she reappeared in the comics as a cloned version of herself 2 years after the death, so like the body had like just cooled off. But it's one of those things where the clones don't always survive or stick around for very long, and so for all intents and purposes, for most of the Marvel Universe history since the 70s, Gwen Stacy's been dead.
Now, I think it's interesting because in Into the Spider-Verse, when they, okay, one more time, guys, and they go through the backstory, she doesn't save her best friend Peter Parker. So is that something that exists in the new comics with her, or is that something that was put into the movie that will be explored in comics as kind of a foil, a parallel to Spider-Man not saving her?
Yeah, so it was in the comics, and I actually don't. I was working in a comic book store at the time this book was coming out, and it's one of those ones where it's like, damn it, if only I had grabbed myself a copy of Edge of Spider-Verse where she first appeared, because that book went gangbusters in sales. But it's one of those ones where it's like, because it got so popular so fast, because this character, people were so excited by her. I haven't had a chance to read that story. They did reprints of it, but I did read some of her solo series. So I don't remember if it was Spider-Verse, Edge of Spider-Verse, or the actual radioactive Spider-Gwen book that introduced this. But yes, so Peter Parker in her universe, which is referred to as Earth 65, the main Marvel continuity is 616. I know some people say 616, but I say 616. But in 65, she was a classmate of Peter Parker's, as typical, but she was the one who was bitten by the radioactive spider. And as we saw, Peter Parker became the Lizard. But I haven't watched the film recently, but I've seen it several times. I don't believe they explore the reason why Peter became the Lizard in the film. Okay, so in the film, or in the comics, because Peter doesn't have his responsibility crutch, as I kind of view it, or the impetus to become a better person, because, Uncle Ben died because he was being a little bit of a smarmy, like, oh, I got superpowers now. But Peter Parker was bullied, And that didn't change across multiple universes, but he didn't have a way to overcome that as like, I'm a superhero now. And he didn't get that ego check. So he, with his brilliant scientific mind, did transform himself. Kind of, he became that universe's version of the Lizard. And Gwen had to kind of subdue him, not in a lethal way, but she wanted to get back to her best friend. But unfortunately, because of the chemical composition, Peter expired and died at the end of the conflict. But she had ultimately kind of redeemed him. But this put a target on, in her universe, she was Spider-Woman. This put a target on Spider-Woman's back because the Daily Bugle thought she killed Peter Parker. That what they all saw was a dead child. So she actually had to go on the run. And in this universe, her father was once more the police captain, Captain Stacy. And so she had this really cool, like, kind of opening salvo of Spider-Gwen is on the run from her own father because he's the police chief who is now deputized to hunt down Spider-Woman, this masked murderer. So it's very interesting, and the ways in which they flipped the script on her and Peter's appearances did allow for some more emotional depth, even for Spider-Man. Like, okay, this is a universe in which Spider-Man didn't get the power, or Peter didn't get the powers. He didn't have that key lesson of responsibility, and so he's affected so much by his victim complex of being bullied at school.
Right, that he becomes the villain.
Yeah.
To no longer be victimized.
Yeah. So now this wasn't actually the first time she had appeared in a film. This was the first time she had appeared in animation. But not only did we have Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy in The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, which I always love the abbreviation of TASM 1 and TASM 2. But Bryce Dallas Howard played her in Spider-Man 3, the most infamous Spider-Mans, which I hold dearly in my heart. That was one of the first superhero films I actually ever saw in theaters. I had a friend who said, I think you might like this. And I was like, on what? Like, what have I ever done to you that would suggest sitting through this was enjoying whatever? But it's funny because I always think of Bryce Dallas Howard as a redhead. So I'm like, why didn't she play MJ?
I haven't seen it in many years, but controversial opinion.
Ooh.
Didn't hate it. Like, I mean, don't tell anybody.
Your secret is safe with us and the 2 people listening to this podcast.
But I kind of liked Dancing Spider-Man.
Oh God, I mean, more so for its mimetic quality, but like I enjoy. I'm not a huge Spider-Man aficionado. I enjoy the character, and I enjoy especially the Spider-Verse. I love seeing that like anyone can be behind the mask, but I'm not of the type that is too discerning to be like, this is a garbage film, or like, some people like really care about it, and again, it sticks in my mind as like, this is one of the first superhero films I saw in theaters, and I'm still here. Like, I still watch superhero films, so
you made it.
I made it. Yeah, it's very interesting because there's this interesting way to look at the love interest in Spider-Man's life, because I mentioned Mary Jane, so now I'm kind of hopping on that train of thought. Mary Jane always represents the kind of, like, everyone says she's like the perfect girl next door. Gwen Stacy's kind of defining characteristic is she's a nice girl. She is also a science student, so she kind of shares that with Peter. And then Black Cat is usually the other of that triumvirate, and she's like the saucy side who only cares for Spider-Man, and she only cares for what she and Spider-Man can do together as a couple of crooks about town. Mary Jane, a lot of people see her as like the ideal Spider-Man partner because she is the balance between really she cares and respects Peter for Peter, but she also encourages and supports his Spider-Man endeavors wherever he can. Gwen Stacy famously really, really liked Peter, and they really vibed on their science knowledge and intellect. But Gwen Stacy did not like Peter Parker or Spider-Man, because when it was revealed that Peter was Spider-Man, Spider was Peter-Man, it's getting very hard to say Spider-Man and Peter Parker. She blamed him partially for the death of her father, because there is an incident in which Captain Stacy dies, and she feels that Spider-Man didn't do all that he could to prevent that. So it is very interesting because in those instances where you get the revelation, Gwen really doesn't care for the Spider-Man side of Peter. So not to say that that makes her any less worthy than the person who likes both or the person who only likes Spider-Man, but I think it's really cool what the writers have done with those three characters in kind of a balance of Spider-Man's life. Because originally Stan Lee and Steve Ditko were like pretty sure that Gwen was going to be the fan favorite, but so they had Peter break up with MJ because he was saying that MJ was too shallow and self-centered. And so he's like, hello, Gwen Stacy, like, what's up? But MJ had such a surge in popularity, all of a sudden they're like, oh, shoot, we should probably like change gears on that. And then when Jerry Conway and Roy Thomas took over for The Amazing Spider-Man, kind of in the early hundreds, they said, we're going to kill Gwen Stacy. And Jerry Conway said, I believe it was Jerry Conway said, Gwen didn't have an edge. She was just a nice person. So they ultimately killed her. And
she was too nice.
Yeah, you know. So nice guys finish last in Spider-Man comics. Wrong lesson to be learned in a comic about responsibility, which is pretty funny.
It's interesting though that of those three, Black Cat, MJ, Gwen Stacy was the one that liked Peter, didn't like Spider-Man. And that's the one that becomes Spider-Woman.
Yes. And now there have been, I mean, Black Cat is a vigilante or anti-hero or even a villain of sorts. There have been a couple instances actually in recent comics where MJ was given the Iron Spider suit, and there's a whole series called Renew Your Vows where they also kind of give her spider powers. But that version of the character doesn't have the same acclaim as Spider-Gwen does. Gwen Stacy was killed before Gail Simone came up with the term fridging for Kyle Rayner's girlfriend who was stuffed into a refrigerator, and that was like the woman is killed for a man's like plot engagement. Right. But Gwen was very famously damseled constantly. But it was an interesting idea that Peter's moment of trying to help but slightly being negligent is what killed her. Actually, there was so much debate at the time where people were like, well, Green Goblin could have killed her. She could have been dead while she was falling. Because I don't know if you're familiar with the death. She does fall from a height, and Spider-Man, in a battle with Green Goblin, Spider-Man webs her to catch her before she hits the ground. But the whiplash
breaks her back.
Breaks her neck.
Okay.
Yes, and so actually 3 issues after her death, they had to issue a statement in the letters page, and it says, it saddens us to say that the whiplash effect she underwent when Spidey's webbing stopped her so suddenly was in fact what killed her. So Peter has to come to terms with the fact that like I've seen that scene reprinted several times, and they've done like recolors and stuff of it for like modern printings. It's so heartbreaking actually to watch Peter see her. He's like gently lowered her down. She's on the ground. She's wrapped in webs. And he's like, hey, you're okay. You're okay. And he like picks her up, and he realizes she's not alive anymore. And like watching Peter come to that realization, it almost makes me feel like sick to my stomach. Like it's so sad to look at because she was so just famously damseled in that way.
Well, and I have to imagine that watching someone die, period, is a horrifying experience, but to know that you caused it has to change a person and change your approach to heroing.
Yeah. Well, and you'd think Spider-Man would have had enough of that the first time with Uncle Ben, but actually notably Gwen's death did affect both Peter and MJ, because MJ was a good friend of Gwen's. And so MJ, who up until that point, in the way that she had been written, because the writers hadn't really intended for her to be Peter's main girl, she kind of became a little more compassionate and mature. And it was kind of like a big moment for both her and Peter in realizing like, oh my goodness, like in this world of superheroes and villains, it's super volatile. And Peter was extremely, extremely upset, as anyone would be. And I think more so than just like, because Peter didn't realize, he thought he had saved her. Like it was a tense moment, and he continued on in the fight, all while believing, like, I think she's safe, but I'm gonna go check on her. And then getting to the ground and realizing that she was not safe, which is just hugely crushing. Peter and MJ actually became closer, and this was part of the transition to, okay, people like MJ a little bit more, so we're going to have her be the girl. And then the third person most affected by this was Professor Miles Warren, who was one of her teachers at the university. This one I think is the creepiest. He was secretly in love with Gwen, and her death drove him mad, and he adopted the persona the Jackal, who actually becomes an integral part of the rest of her story, because the Jackal is obsessed with cloning, and so he's the cause of Kane Parker and Ben Reilly, and then he clones Gwen Stacy, and so he was actually responsible for the first and then the numerous clones of Gwen Stacy after. And I don't remember what issue number it was specifically that she was cloned in, but basically she died in 73, and then in 75 they had the Jackal create clones, and a lot of the clones haven't survived. Some of the clones have killed each other. Some of them have gone by different names that wasn't Gwen Stacy, which is kind of weird in general. Just, I like the idea of the clones killing each other. Like is a strong word, but like I find it darkly amusing. That they're like, I'm the real Gwen Stacy, or like I'm gonna be the real Gwen Stacy. It's like, no, none of you are the real Gwen Stacy. And so that's been kind of her big run. I mean, from this point until then, unless it's in a flashback story, which is sparingly used now that they've kind of aged Spidey up. Comic book timelines are weird. My favorite instance of which I think I've brought up before, is Peter Parker, Flash Thompson, who is Agent Venom, Jessica Jones, and Silk are all from the same high school class. Because of retcons, because Peter Parker and Flash Thompson were classmates from the get-go. And then when they introduced Jessica Jones, they gave her I don't like this, but they gave her a retroactive first appearance in a really early Spider-Man comic where they're like, see that brunette girl in the crowd of Peter's classmates?
Background.
Yeah, as he's fighting Sandman, that's Jessica Jones. And I'm like, it's not though. But then when they introduced Silk and was like, she was also bitten by the radioactive spider that Peter was bitten by before she was whisked away by Ezekiel to keep her in a hole for 14 years or whatever. They're all part of the same class, but like Jessica Jones is married with a child, and Silk is like weirdly ambiguously like in her maybe early 20s, and Peter is now like the CEO of his own corporation of Parker Industries, and he's like vaguely 30, mid 30s, and then it's like Agent Venom is like, who knows how old he's been to space. Like, that is like the weirdest, like, so Gwen is kind of caught in time because Spider-Gwen also seems to be in her existence. She's a younger version of Gwen because she is still in high school with Peter Parker. But their timeline is all over the place.
If she's not in high school, I feel like she could pass for out of high school. And I don't quite remember if they specify that she is still in high school. But she's young enough that she passes.
Yeah, I mean, she's at least posing in Miles's school.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not really sure about that. And you know, we're getting a sequel that for Spider-Verse that is supposed to focus a little bit more on her and Miles's relationship, which is something that they've also done in the comics a little bit. They've like kind of flirted with the idea of them being an item. I think when spider people get their webs tangled, like metaphorically, like it causes a lot of drama. I mean, everyone's got across the Spider-Verse, everyone has their baggage of like, oh yeah, these are my bad guys. These are my versions of the bad guys. Like Miles Morales.
My friend that died too.
Yeah, like Miles Morales has his own version of Venom, and Gwen Stacy fights Daredevil. Matt Murdock is the kingpin of New York, and he's the fans call him Matt Murderdock because he's like so evil and he has people killed and stuff. But she fights the Falcon, or not the Falcon, the Vulture. Jeez Louise, the bird people. But it's interesting also because multiversal shenanigans. They brought her over from Earth 65. They had a crossover with her and Silk and Jessica Drew Spider-Woman that they called Spider-Women, and it was like, oh, this is a big deal, and somehow the universes get crossed. But in some recent events, they kind of did away with a lot of the multiverse, and they made like just the kind of main Earth. And so Spider-Gwen has been like, I'll be the Gwen Stacy of Earth 616, and like leaves her Earth behind. And so now she's in the main continuity, but she goes by Ghost Spider because technically she doesn't ever go by Spider-Gwen to other heroes,
right?
Because that's giving away her identity. It might as well be Bruce Man if you were like Batman. hey, I'm Batwayne. So she goes
Superkins.
So she would go by Spider Woman, but Spider Woman is already taken in this universe. So she goes by Ghost Spider as a dark. First of all, it's a nod to her costume, but as like a darkly comedic nod, she says, "Death loves Gwen Stacy, so I'm going to be Ghost Spider," which I think is kind of actually cool. A lot of people were like, that's a dumb name," and I'm like, is it any worse than calling yourself Spider Gwen?
Well, Spider-Man is cool and all, but it's not the coolest name ever.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult to have a superhero name that's really super duper cool, but I mean, the powers are cool, and Ghost Spider or Spider Gwen, Spider Woman, whatever, like,
yeah,
she's awesome.
Yeah, she is, and it's interesting because some of the features of Spider Gwen seem to be like they were kind of prototyped in Ultimates Marvel, which is Earth 1610. Ultimate Marvel Gwen Stacy was a bit of a punk in class. She pulled a knife on her classmates when they were bullying Peter. Her father, who I think he has a different name. He was John Stacy, and I don't remember what his main universe name is. Maybe it was John Stacy. He gets killed in the line of duty. Aunt May adopts her, and so she's got this kind of like, "Hey, Peter, we're roommates" kind of thing. But she blames Peter / Spider-Man for her father's death. Once again, she pulls a gun on him. She gets killed by Carnage, and then she gets cloned again. I think that's one of the universal constants of a Gwen Stacy.
Cloning.
Is going to get cloned. And Marvel's had their Clone Conspiracy and their Clone Saga events. And then ultimately, I think one of the most interesting parts of the visitation of her before she got this new, because you can almost do like an AD BC kind of like, here's everything Gwen Stacy before Spider-Gwen, because it's the nice girl, the death, and the clones, and it's always going to be clones. But they did a What If comic, and I love the What If comics so much. But they did a What If Gwen Stacy hadn't died. And the most interesting thing that they suggest, and these books don't always necessarily follow the logic of what could have realistically happened, but they've got to tell a complete story. When Gwen lives, Pete comes to check on her, and she learns that he's Spider-Man and decides that she isn't mad because he saved her life. He might not have been able to save her father, but he saved her life. What does Spider-Man do? He proposes to her, and she says, "Hot damn, I'm in." I'm paraphrasing, but she enthusiastically agrees.
I thought that was literally what she said.
I don't have the
That's a weird acceptance.
No, I have that comic in my collection. I will check. I'm pretty sure she does not say "hot damn." But Green Goblin survives the fight as well, and I mean, he survived the fight, but he sees Peter revealing his identity to Gwen Stacy, so he snaps some quick pics, sends them to J. Jonah Jameson, and J. Jonah Jameson launches a full-on manhunt for Spider-Man. So on their wedding day, Gwen Stacy gets left at the altar because Peter has to go on the run. So it didn't end well for her, even when she did live.
In either iteration.
Yeah. So I think that's an interesting testament to her character, that she seems like, even in the version where she lives, barring the Spider-Gwen stuff, this version of Gwen Stacy seems caught in a perpetual, she's the nice girl, but she ultimately isn't going to be Spider-Man's choice. She doesn't get to come out on top, and I think that's why fans gravitated so much towards Spider-Gwen, because she gets to be a hero. She doesn't get to be sidelined or cloned or like, your professor had a secret crush on you. That's kind of creepy, right? Like, she was for a long time just not really a player. She was the nice girl. Gwen had no edge. She was just a nice person. So I think ultimately they took those punk aspects from Ultimate Marvel. They took her kind heart. They gave her a similar but not carbon copy emotional struggle with Peter Parker. They took some unique takes on it based on her relationship with her father, which is a core facet of all of these stories as well. And as far as I know, there's no clones of Spider-Gwen running around. There's a lot of spider people. Oh my God. I don't think I can handle it. That'll be the next Spider-Gwen, the Ghost Spider clone conspiracy. Oh my God. I don't think I can handle it. But yeah, I think, and being Into the Spider-Verse was that last like real big push that she needed to become a mainstream hero. Her color scheme is super iconic. She was designed by Rico Renzi and Robbie Rodriguez, double R's. She was written by Jason Latour. She was pitched by Dan Slott, who was like, hey, we're doing a Spider-Verse event. Like, wouldn't it be cool if like Gwen Stacy had to? And I think it's so much. I think it is such an underdog like redemption story. And knowing now what you know about her crazy comic book backstory, I think you might be able to agree that if they had made it Spider MJ or whatever, like I know she has her, I think she's called Spinneret in the Renew Your Vows, but that's a totally separate thing. And they have like she and Peter have a kid. Like that's a totally separate universe. But identifying that like, hey, we've done Gwen Stacy a massive disservice and clones ain't going to cut it anymore. Giving her that oomph and then being in an Oscar-winning film.
Well, and also her, like you see her as, you know, Gwanda. But you don't see Spider-Gwen or Spider-Woman, as she's known on her Earth, until she's there saving Miles Morales and Schlubby Peter Parker. Like, she bursts onto the scene as Spider-Woman to save them. So knowing the backstory, it's definitely a like, okay, here's your moment. We apologize. Have the hero.
Yeah, but it works so brilliantly with what Marvel has turned the Spider-Verse into, because they've always, I mean, with the clone characters or like the other people who have been bitten and like, oh, there's alternate universe Spider-Man characters, they've really been able to craft such a richer story about the responsibility of that mantle, what it means when someone takes up the Spider-Man mask, like even being a masked hero, like that carries a lot of ramifications. Like, why are you hiding your face? Because you're doing much like Peter Parker in her Earth. She's doing a good service, but she's always going to be misunderstood by the media or the other people. And
I also wonder if, yes, they need the responsibility kick, but is having someone close to you killed, it's the point that you have to hide your face driven home, because you are going to be targeted. Anyone who is close to Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, those people are going to be hunted to get to them. So you're right, they'll constantly be misunderstood because they are vigilantes and, you know, like Miles Morales' dad, like, I don't like Spider-Man.
I love you.
Yeah. You have to say it back. So they are misunderstood, but you already put those people in danger that you're near. You can't put them in more danger.
Yeah. And ultimately, I mean, Peter Parker loses Uncle Ben, the father figure in his life, and he loses Gwen Stacy through the best of intentions, trying to save her. And then in that really cool way that is mirrored, Gwen loses her father, very important, obviously, father figure, and she loses Peter, not necessarily through something she did, but as a result or at the end of being in the wrong place, wrong time, trying to save him. And so while it is a familiar feeling story, they've added a new level of emotional depth to it. I think it's just a brilliant character change. And like you mentioned earlier, there's something really great about the fact that she gets to keep her femininity. She's a dancer in the comics and in the I think in the movie. She's a rocker. She's part of the Mary Janes, a band.
Yeah, she plays drums in the movie.
She plays drums, and so there's the fun aspect to it. She didn't have to stay also like she's a science student. They made her own thing. They incorporated that punk attitude from the Ultimates, but ultimately created not a clone, but an entirely new idea of Gwen Stacy that I think stands high above the rest. And that fans have, it was one of those things that fans didn't know they needed until Marvel presented us with Spider-Gwen.
Well, and they did a great job of appealing to fans who know the story and also newbies.
Yes. Yeah, it's one of those characters who's welcoming for all sorts of different reasons. And I think ultimately that is what needed to happen with the character if she wasn't just going to become a perpetual clone plot device. It inadvertently, purposefully enhanced Peter's story, but inadvertently gave Gwen Stacy just this entirely new and unique presence. And I can't wait to see where she goes in Spider-Verse sequels and continues to have her own heroic legacy equal to that of Spider-Man. While none of her clones could exactly hold a candle to the original Gwen Stacy, it's clear that being given heroic leading lady status has helped to revive the character more than the Jackal ever could. Fans love this new take on Gwen's kind heart, giving her superpowers and an emotional complex drive to fight crime, whether she's in Earth-65 or 616. This renewed interest in her adventures has solidified Gwen Stacy's legendary status throughout the Spider-Verse. Thank you for joining us. This has been Gwen Stacy Then and Now. Do you enjoy listening to Then and Now? We are proud to bring you pop culture content completely ad-free, but that doesn't mean we don't need your support to help keep us going. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform and help spread the word about our podcast. We welcome fan feedback. Email us at podcasts@sideshow.com with your thoughts and suggestions for how we can make our shows even better. Plus, tune in for our full network of pop culture podcasts. See if your fan favorites make the cut in the Geek Culture Countdown, a bi-weekly podcast featuring pop culture top 10 lists. Hear exclusive interviews with celebrities and pop culture industry leaders as they let their Geek Side show in Look Who Showed Up. Join comedian Jeff May and his special guests as they discuss anything and everything in Sideshow's Sideshow. Then get all the latest pop culture news with our daily briefing, a 2-minute breakdown of the biggest geek headlines perfect for your Alexa or Google News briefings. We wouldn't exist without your continued support. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to let your geek side show.